Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Hang 'Em Twice by William W. Johnstone and J. A. Johnstone, narrated by John Mclain. Chapter 1. Some things a man knows he ought never do, like placing your hat on a bed, or riding a pinto horse, unless you happen to be an Indian, or borrowing a pocket knife that has the blade open, but then returning it with the blade closed, or not sharpening a straight razor 3 times on each side, or removing the ashes from a stove on a Friday. But here sat Dooley Monahan in the Elkhorn Saloon in Denver City, Colorado, about to make the worst move of his life, which was saying a lot. "1 card?" Dooley told the dealer while tossing his discard onto the center of the table. The dealer, a pockmarked man with a handlebar mustache, sleeve garters, and shaded spectacles, deftly slid a paste card across the green felt cloth toward Dooley's pile of chips, which happened to be a lot smaller than when he had taken that empty seat 4 hours earlier. The stagecoach messenger, the one the size of a grizzly with about as much hair, not the other driver, who was bald and had no teeth, drew 3 cards. The merchant, wearing the bowler hat and plaid sack suit, took 3 as well. The dealer sent the stagecoach driver, the bald one, 2 cards. That was it. The dealer had folded on the first bet, and the other chairs had been vacated during the course of the 4 hours, and no one in the Elkhorn appeared willing to try to bust the stagecoach drivers, the bald one without any teeth but a massive pile of chips, run of luck. Dooley watched as the players picked up their cards, shuffled them into the proper places among the cards they held. "Your bet." The dealer nodded at the toothless stagecoach man, who grinned, wet his lips, and studied his chips. "Check," the man said. "Check," said Dooley. That caused the stagecoach messenger, the one who looked like a grizzly, and smelled like one too, to use his substantial neck to turn his substantial head at Dooley. "You ain't even looked at your card, mister," the big cuss said, and tapped a substantial finger on the felt, pointing at the card Dooley had drawn. Dooley sipped his beer. "I don't have to," he said. That caused the big man to straighten and study Dooley closer. Then he eyed the dealer, who merely shrugged and said, "Your bet, sir." The big one looked at his cards, then at Dooley, then at the dealer, then at that double-barreled coach gun, which he used to guard against stagecoach robberies. Dooley did not plan on robbing any stagecoach, and at this point he wasn't even sure he planned on sticking in the game once the betting started. The grizzly bear looked back at Dooley. "You some kind of clairvoyager?" he asked. Dooley blinked. "Huh? You heard me." "I heard you," Dooley said. "I just don't understand what you mean." "I said, either you's some kind of clairvoyager, or this here's about as crooked a deal as I've ever had, and I've had me a passel of crooked deals." Dooley's mouth turned to sand, and he had just swallowed about a fifth of his freshly poured beer. He began running those superstitions through his head again, as the big man placed his cards on the table and lowered the right hand toward the substantial scattergun that would make even Buffalo Bill Cody or Wild Bill Hickok nervous. "Never place your hat on a bed. Always sharpen your straight razor 3 times, on each side. Don't ever take ashes out of a stove on a Friday. And don't be a danged fool. And—" The merchant interrupted Dooley's thoughts. "Do you mean clairvoyant?" Now the Leviathan turned his massive head at the merchant. "That's what I said, gol darn it." Dooley grinned, shook his head, and said, after breathing a sigh of relief, "I'm no clairvoyant." which turned out to be the wrong thing to say, because the stagecoach messenger rose, tipping his chair over. "Then that means this here be a crooked deal." The man's hand reached for the shotgun, a massive Parker 10-gauge that looked more like a howitzer than a scattergun. And as big as that cannon seemed, the big cuss's hand practically dwarfed it. The dealer had reached for the much slimmer Colt in a shoulder holster. The merchant simply turned about as pale as Dooley thought his own face must be looking about now. Blue, Dooley's Merle hound, growled. A saloon gal bringing drinks toward the neighboring table abruptly took her ryes and bourbons and beers and one glass of champagne toward the other side of the saloon. And the folks sitting at the neighboring table stopped playing cards and quickly cleared out of the way. That's when the other stagecoach man, the Jehu without any teeth, broke into laughter. "Sit down, you ignorant oaf," he said to the grizzly bear. "He ain't no clear voyager, and this ain't no crooked deal." The grizzly turned his angry eyes at the skinny old man, who downed a shot of rye and smiled a toothless smile. "He ain't got to see what card he drawed on account I didn't bet," the Jehu said as if explaining a math equation to a bumpkin. "He's waiting to see how this hand plays out, you fool. So bet, check, or fold." Those words finally registered, and the giant released his grip on the shotgun. One of the neighboring poker players decided to be a gentleman and lifted the grizzly's chair off the floor, smiled at Blue, who settled back down by Dooley's chair's legs, and the man returned to his own chair at his own table. Dooley finished his beer. After the giant settled back into his seat and re-examined his cards, he snorted, gave Dooley a sideways glance, and said, "I still think you might be a clear voyager." "Bet and find out," Dooley started to say, but he had already broken one of the sacred vows of cowboys and poker players and decided now was not the time to push his luck. He shrugged and nodded at the saloon gal and called out, "Another round for my compatriots." "Thank you," everyone said except the grizzly, who spit into the sawdust and said, "I wasn't no compatriot, mister. I wore the blue, with the finest artillery regiment in Rosecrans's army." "What were you?" the slim Jehu said, sniggering. "A cannon?" The grizzly frowned and slid his winnings into the pile in the center. "It'll cost you my whole pile to find out." As the dealer eyed the chips, greenbacks, and coins, the merchant tossed his cards onto the deadwood. "I am too drained after this excitement to think clearly," he said, "so I shall fold." The toothless driver of stages laughed. "On account you didn't draw what you needed." The merchant did not respond. Said the dealer, "I make that right at $137.55. You done all that in your noggin?" the toothless Jehu said. "He's probably one of them clear voyagers, too," the grizzly bear growled. Dooley swallowed down his nerves and looked at the one card he had drawn, still face down on the felt, but did not lift it. Yet. The skinny driver grinned and said as he reached for his chips, "Why don't we make it an even $500? He tossed in some greenbacks and gold coins. "But you checked," the merchant pointed out. "There's no law against checking and raising," the dealer said. "But it's not gentlemanly," the merchant said. Dooley had to agree with the merchant's assessment, but that didn't matter. The only thing that mattered now was to see what the dealer had delivered him. Since Dooley was neither a clairvoyant nor a clear voyager, he stretched his left hand across the table, put his fingers on the card, and thumbed the corner up just slightly. He left the card on the table and laid the 4 cards he kept on top of them. "I guess that's a fold," The sentence stopped in the toothless coot's throat as Dooley picked up his cards and asked the dealer, "So it's 500 to me?"
"That's right."
Holding the 5 cards in his left hand, Dooley began counting what he had left. It amounted to a little more than $230.
"Tell you what, mister,"
the toothless codger said.
"That's a fine dog you got lying there by your boots. I mean, if you want a raise."
Dooley grinned. "How much you think old Blue's worth?" Thin lips cut off the toothless grin. The merchant's chair legs scraped across the floor, and the man pushed back his bowler and walked around.
"I know a few things of dogs."
He studied Blue, who did not seem the least interested.
"That's an Australian shepherd, I think. Maybe 7, 8 years old. Good dog."
"You some dog clairvoyager?" the grizzly bear asked. The merchant smiled.
"No, I just know dogs. A dog like that in Denver would go for $600.
Everyone at the table stared incredulously at the merchant, who sat down.
"Boys," he said, "this is Denver City. You know how much a bath costs, or an all-night woman. A dog like that is worth a lot of money."
"Last dog I had," said the grizzly bear, "I ate for supper." The barmaid brought over the drinks, and Dooley paid her and asked the dealer, "Table stakes?" Once the dealer nodded, Dooley slid the rest of his money into the pot.
"Are you calling, sir, or raising?"
the dealer asked.
"Just a call."
He leaned over and scratched Blue's ears.
"What I figured,"
said the toothless gent. The grizzly bear snorted and reached inside his greasy buckskin jacket, withdrawing a piece of crumpled yellow paper. "This here is the deed to a mine I gots up in Leadville. You saw the poke I cashed in to sit in this game? That poke come out of my mine. If a damned blue dog is worth $600 in this town, I reckon my mine is worth 5,000. So that's my bet."
"Hoss,"
the thin Jehu said, the word hissing through his gums,
"you can't be betting your mine."
"I sure am, Chester, because I know you's bluffing." The dealer reached into the pot and withdrew the paper. His face registered distaste as he smoothed it out and said after a long while,
"This looks to be a proper deed, duly registered. But as to the veracity of its value, it's worth 5,000,
the toothless Jehu said.
"Ain't the best mine in Leadville, but it's plumb fine. He won't tell nobody where it is, though." "If you've got a valuable mine,"
the merchant said,
"why are you guarding the Leadville-Denver stage?"
That, Dooley thought, was a mighty intelligent question. The grizzly bear growled, "Stage runs once a week. When I ain't riding guard for Chester, I's working my mine." The merchant shook his head.
"It's a 2-day run to Denver, a 2-day run back. And if there's snow, rain, or mud, it can be 3 days. So you're saying that you work a mine 2 or 3 days only, and it's worth $5,000?
"Yep," the grizzly said. "Ask Chester."
"I tell him,"
the Jehu said before anyone asked him,
"that he ought to give up this job and concentrate on the mine. But he don't trust nobody to guard his silver, so he rides shotgun."
Everyone sipped drinks and stared at the grizzly.
"Boys,"
the Jehu said,
"if you don't believe it, he puts his money in the First Republican Bank of Denver."
The dealer shrugged.
"It's up to you players. The Elkhorn has no money in this hand."
$1,000 to you, Chester," the grizzly told the toothless man. The lean driver looked at his hand, then at the grizzly bear, and cursed as he tossed in his hand.
"Ha!"
The grizzly bear leaned back in his chair. "I knowed you was bluffing.
So I reckon.
He reached for the pot, but Dooley cleared his throat.
It's 1,000 to me, then?
He asked. The front legs to the chair slammed against the hardwood floor, and the giant turned, surprised, as Dooley said,
If my dog's worth $600, how much would you reckon that horse I tethered to the hitching rail out front is worth? That fine bay gelding?
The merchant asked. The man was sure observant, and he knew a whole lot about the cost of things in Denver City.
His name's General Grant,
Dooley said.
$2,000?
The merchant said.
This is Denver City, so it's Denver prices. If you were playing in Dodge City, I'd allow it to be worth $600, $700.
Well, I wouldn't sell him in Dodge City for $2,000, Dooley said.
But you're betting him? And your dog?
The grizzly bear grunted. You got anything else worth betting? Dooley asked. He turned toward the merchant.
How much is that scattergun worth? Denver City prices. Or maybe you have a mule, a horse, some more pokes in your saddlebags?
The grizzly bear tossed his cards onto the table.
Horatio,
the toothless cur named Chester said.
Don't be a damned fool. At least call the son of a gun. I was bluffing. So was he. You got him beat. You ain't got to fold, you ignoramus. No, I ain't betting old Betsy.
He rubbed his palm against the shotgun's twin barrels.
And I ain't betting Clyde. That's my mule. She's in Leadville.
Clyde,
Dooley thought,
is a she?
But...
Chester whined. Dooley let out a breath and dragged his winnings toward him, including the filthy deed to some hole in Leadville. As he was doing that, Chester reached across the felt and overturned Dooley's hand. 9 of spades, 10 of hearts, Queen of spades, King of clubs, Jack of diamonds.
See?
Chester said, nodding at Horatio. He turned over his hand, 3 8s, a deuce, and another jack.
He had me beat. Wait a minute,
said Chester.
You mind telling me what you drawed?
Dooley smiled.
The jack.
Chester settled into his chair.
You don't know no better than to try to draw to an inside straight?
You checked, Dooley said. And raised?
Horatio frowned, then grinned, and finally laughed. A good thing, Dooley thought. His luck had to be changing. He had managed to break every poker player's rule. Never draw to an inside straight. He had won.
But he could have beat you,
the merchant said.
He drew 2 cards.
If he had anything better than 3 of a kind, Dooley said, he would have bet the mine to begin with. He's no sandbagger.
The grizzly bear put his elbows on the table, rested his big head in his huge hands, and nodded.
Yep,
he said glumly.
But at least I didn't lose old Betsy. Or Clyde.
Dooley pushed his winnings to the dealer.
Cash me out, will you? And take a 10 for yourself. And another round for the table?
The dealer nodded. And after drinking and talking with the boys, Dooley rose at last, the money belt heavy across his waist.
Come on, Blue,
he said. He looked at the grizzly bear.
How do I get to Leadville, sir?
You can ride in my stage,
Chester said. Dooley shook his head.
I'd rather ride my horse.
The big head moved slightly, but the toothless man spoke.
Ride west, mister. Then climb the tallest hill you see and keep on climbing till you reach the moon.
And how do I find your mine?
Dooley asked. The grizzly shrugged.
I'll draw you a map tomorrow morning when I'm sober.
And if you still can't find it, I'll show you myself when Chester and me hit Leadville."
Nodding his agreement, Dooley Monahan felt pretty good. Well, who wouldn't? With a silver mine, and a good dog, and a great horse, and a lot of money in his belt. He had drawn to an inside straight. He had won more money than he had seen in years. No one had tried to kill him. In fact, everyone here in Denver City seemed right friendly. Things were looking up. He stepped out onto the boardwalk and felt a bullet rip off his hat. Chapter 2. The long-barreled Colt .45 leaped into Dooley's hand, but Dooley did not leap. He dived, landing against the water trough in front of the saloon as another bullet slammed into the bat-wing door. Blue growled, barked, and started to charge whoever it was across the street shooting at Dooley, but Dooley reached out with his left hand, gripping the makeshift collar he had affixed. The bouncer at the saloon had told Dooley in no uncertain terms that the Elkhorn did not allow dogs in the establishment unless they were well trained and had a collar. Dooley understood. He had unfastened his bandana and tied it around the merle-colored dog's neck. Then he had tipped the bouncer $1. He wasn't about to leave Blue outside with General Grant, not in a town like Denver City. He hadn't been crazy about leaving his gelding tied to the hitching rail. A third shot boomed, and Dooley felt cold water splash on the brim of his hat. He sucked in a deep breath and stared at the doors to the saloon, waiting for somebody to come out to help, to yell for the constable or marshal or sheriff or army or vigilantes or whoever was responsible for law and order in this rough town. He could see where the bullet had punched out some tiny planks in the door, which still swung on its hinges. Shouts inside the saloon slowly ceased, replaced by, Dooley thought, whispers. Nobody appeared. Nobody called for the law. Finally, once the doors stopped swinging, the big door, the real door on the left side, closed. Dooley frowned. Blue growled. A second later, the door on the right side shut. Someone twisted a key in the lock. "Great," Dooley whispered. Another bullet splintered the column post to Dooley's left. The horses, including General Grant, began pulling against their tethers, stamping their hooves, snorting, and causing quite the commotion. But Dooley had to give the gunman credit for one thing. The man didn't want to hit a horse, even by accident. He just, for some unknown reason, wanted to shoot down Dooley. Or did he? That first shot, the one that had punched 2 holes, entrance and exit, into Dooley's hat, easily could have taken off the top of Dooley's head. Had the gunman merely wanted to get Dooley's attention? It was an interesting theory, Dooley allowed, and he might have studied on it a little longer, had he not quickly disavowed that notion altogether. He looked down the boardwalk and darkened street at another hitching rail and watering trough that was nowhere nearly as crowded as the one he crouched behind now. He couldn't see the building that clearly, for the street lamp was not burning, but Dooley could make out the design of a star on the window. He had not noticed the lawman's office when he rode up to the saloon, but he had not been thinking much about lawmen, just poker, and a beer, and... Dooley sucked in a deep breath, held it for just a moment, then exhaled. "Stay here," he whispered to Blue, and he came up to his knees, then on the balls of his feet, and exploded through the mud toward the darkened corner and the building with the lawman's badge on the window. A bullet burned his back and shattered glass in the saloon. That was no help, and Dooley dived as another bullet tore a gash across the corner of the trough. Dooley landed behind the safety of the watering spot, came up, and caught his breath. "Hey!" he shouted to the darkened building. Then he cursed. It was darker here than it was in front of the saloon, even after some jerk had closed the main doors, But Dooley had good eyesight and had learned all his letters back at the subscription school and through his mother's instructions and at church back in Iowa.
Stars Millinery.
He had to laugh. So much for finding safety at a lawman's office.
Well, he thought, my own hat's got holes in it now, but I don't know how I'd look in an Orleans turban or some fancy thing of braid, satin, and flowers with a bow tied on the top.
He also wondered,
what kind of town has a ladies' hat shop sitting next to a saloon and gambling parlor?
He stopped thinking when another round pounded against the watering trough. This time Dooley came up, felt the .45 buck in his hand, and ducked before he got his head blown off. His back burned from where the bullet had torn his shirt, just below where the vest has risen up on him, but he felt no blood, just heat. That also told him that either the man shooting at him had to be the best shot in Denver, Colorado, if not the entire western frontier of these here United States, or that the man certainly meant to do Dooley Monahan harm. Blue growled, causing Dooley to panic.
"Stay!"
he shouted, and cringed as a bullet ripped into the door of Stars Millinery. He looked up and down the street, but nothing came into view except the horses still dancing and snorting and scared in front of the saloon. Dooley started inching toward the corner of the trough nearest the saloon, but stopped, reconsidering, and moved the other way. When he reached the edge, he looked down the darkened street, waited, and came up again, firing the Colt, and this time waiting just long enough to see a shadow disappear. He thumbed back the hammer, aimed this time, and squeezed the trigger. The muzzle flash pained his eyes, as it had done before, but Dooley saw splinters fly from the wooden facade across the street. He dropped down, shoved open the loading gate, pulled the hammer at half cock, and worked the plunger and cylinder until the hot empty casings fell beside him. His fingers pushed fresh loads from his cartridge belt. One dropped into the mud. He didn't pick it up until he had every chamber filled, the gate shut, and the hammer pulled back to full cock. Once he had wiped the grit, mud, and moisture from the shell, he slipped it into his vest pocket and moved back the other way toward Blue, closer to the saloon, and stopped at the trough's edge. Blue whined. Dooley tried to give him a smile and wink of encouragement. He wet his lips, pressed his body into the cold dampness of the mud, and inched a bit forward again. Now that he knew exactly where the assassin was hiding across the street, Dooley figured he had at least a chance of surviving this gunfight. Providin', he thought, the man hasn't moved to another position. He looked up at the outline of the building. The shooter could be on top of the roof. He looked underneath the bellies of the horses, including General Grant, and through the legs of the steeds at another alley. Or he could be down there. He felt his back burning again from the slug the man-killer had fired. Or he could be behind me. "Stop thinking," he whispered to himself. "You've been in scrapes worse than this." The assassin might be. "Stop it!" he snapped. His voice startled him. He hadn't meant to yell anything. He told himself, "You'll worry and thank yourself into Boot Hill if you keep this up." A movement across the street caught his eye. He steadied the heavy Colt in his hand, waited. So, the man shooting at Dooley had not moved after all. Dooley slowed his breathing, steadied himself, refusing to blink or move. The barrel of a rifle caught the reflection of a street lamp down the street. Dooley squeezed the trigger. He came up this time, fired again. The rifle dropped into the dirt. A hand reached for it, and Dooley pulled the Colt's trigger. "Yo!" The hand disappeared back behind the
Sample complete. Ready to continue?